Stephen King's iconic horror stories have been adapted into films dozens and dozens and dozens of times. But which one is the best one? And we're not gonna find that out today because I'm only gonna be ranking the adaptations that I've seen and read. And the list of Stephen King books that I've both read and seen isn't very long. So I guess we can look forward to a part 2 of this video sometime in the future. All right, let's get things rolling here with the bottom of the list for me, which is Needful Things. From what I understand, there is like a mini series. I don't know if it's a mini series version of this movie or if it's just like a super extended version of this movie that is a lot longer. I don't know if it's any better. I didn't know that at the time. I watched the shorter version and I even fell asleep during that. So I don't know if I'd make it through like a mini series or whatever. But anyone who has been on this channel for a little while may remember me reading a bunch of Stephen King books. I think they're in a playlist. If it is, I'll link it up here. And I struggled a lot reading Stephen King's books, but compared to the movie, this wasn't half bad. In fact, I think I appreciate this a little bit more now having seen the movie. I just feel like the movie totally lost the slow corruption of this town. Like in the movie, like Gaunt just shows up and everything immediately starts going to hell. Like where was the suspense? Where was the build up? Like this book was a lot to get through. It's a thicken, but it was way better. It was way better than the movie. Next on my list, coming in second to last, is Pet Sematary 2019 adaptation. Like while the main themes of the story are there, it's the ending sequence for me in this one that really puts me off of this adaptation. It was the addition of Lewis being buried in the pet cemetery that really changed the whole thing. Like the story is about Lewis and him dealing with guilt and grief and him not being able to deal with that, which is why he goes and buries his son in the pet cemetery, right? And then at the end of the story, he goes and buries Rachel there as well. Like clearly not really having learned his lesson and having gone mad. And it's also about how his inability to deal with these feelings ultimately hurts the rest of his family as well. So I really don't get why in this adaptation, like he gets buried in the pet cemetery and then it ends with them like creepily surrounding Gage like in the car. It was a weird choice that did not land for me. All right, next on my list is Carrie 2013. I really don't remember this adaptation being that different, except for it being set like in the present day, so in like 2013. And I feel like I vaguely remember people having a problem with that because of cell phones, smartphones. People were pointing out a lot of scenarios that become a little less dire if you have access to like call or text people for help, i.e. like the prom scene, right? And to be honest, it's not that I like really actively dislike this adaptation. It's more so that I don't just ever really think about it ever. If I had to point out one thing like I don't like about this particular adaptation is like the weird need, I guess, to have like a more bombastic ending with that whole like rock storm that Carrie does to like bury the house or whatever. It was just too much. Like not everything needs to be super crazy with explosions and crazy shit happening, you know? Alrighty, next two of these for me. This was a difficult choice deciding how I felt about these two adaptations, especially in relation to each other, and that is The Shining. So the first one I'm going to be talking about is the miniseries from 1997. It was difficult for me to decide which one I liked more, which I know all of you are going to think I'm insane for that, and that's fine. I watched the miniseries for the first time while reading the book. We did that for a Does This Offend You? I do remember that. And I personally liked the inclusion of a lot more of the scenes from the book in the miniseries. Now the CGI effects in the miniseries, rough. And it's hard to compare like any other performance to Jack Nicholson in Kubrick's version. I get that, but I liked seeing more of the book scenes, and I like the fact that Dick Hallorann survives just like he is supposed to in the book. So I have Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining right above this one on my ranking list. I don't really care about Stanley Kubrick, like, at all. This movie, The Shining, his version of The Shining, is the only Kubrick film I've willingly watched multiple times. And honestly, I rewatch it for the vibes. The vibes are great. Like, talk about suspense. Like, immediate sense of dread in this movie, immediate. And obviously the performances are kind of bar none. Nicholson is great. Duvall is great. However, Dick Hallorann in this movie, not it. Like, him getting killed in the honestly most bullshit cheap jump scare scene ever sucked ass. I said what I said. Moving on the list, Carrie, again, the original adaptation from 1976. Although I'm gonna get hate on this video regardless, but I feel like this adaptation was also just like, it was just okay. Like, when I finally read the book for the first time, I was surprised by the format of it. It's like a mock, like, nonfiction. It's like it's all told after the fact, like in the aftermath of this event that happened in this town. So it's like interviews from people, news articles, stuff like that. And I thought that was really interesting. And then you have both of these adaptations, honestly, that just kind of tell the story in real time all the way through. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just compared to the format of the book. I just feel like we were missing an opportunity here. We're still missing an opportunity. Like, I need somebody to make like a mockumentary adaptation of this. That's it's just a little more maybe true to the book. I think that would be interesting to see. I ranked this one higher than the 2013 one, mostly because of time. I've seen this original adaptation of Carrie so many times. But for both adaptations, I will say one thing that I really dislike. I don't know if I say dislike. I struggle with this because I hate in both adaptations that Carrie is so skinny, because in the book she's overweight. That's one of the reasons why she's bullied. And don't get me wrong, if it's one thing I hate about Stephen King, it's his rampant fat phobia in like so many of his books, even recent ones. But I feel like it would have been foundational for me and so many others to see a big girl be powerful for a little bit, even if she is technically like the villain of the story, kinda. Okay, next on my list is Pet Sematary again, but the original adaptation. I read this book after my mom died, and damn, did it hit hard. Out of all the Stephen King books I've read so far, this is one of my favorite ones. For that reason, like, I believe I read it at the right time that I was meant to read it. But before I had read it, I'd seen this adaptation so many times, and it's ranked higher on the list, definitely because it is quite true to the source material. Like, I feel like it really does just kind of like hit all the beats of the book. It was almost like they were like, the story is good on its own, the story speaks for itself, we're just gonna do that. And I feel like that's kind of why it's more like the middle of the list for me. It's not like an amazing adaptation where I feel like they did stuff totally different and it worked really well. They followed the story and it works. Although I can feel Emma typing in the comments right now, because I know she came to this video and probably scrolled until she saw Pet Sematary. All right, next on my list, and in the number 5 spot, is Dolores Claiborne. And it's mostly this high up on the list because of the queen, Kathy Bates. I love her so much. She's an icon, honestly. And the story's great too. I love a good for her moment. And this is a rare good for her Stephen King story. Who'da thunk? But I gotta give props to this adaptation as well for the cinematography. Like, it was moody when it needed to be. And then the eclipse sequence, oh my god. I want to live there. It's so gorgeous. It really makes the story come alive. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the book. It's one of my favorites. It has a unique format in that it's told as Dolores is just giving her confessional like to the police about what happened. So she's just talking straight through. There's no chapter breaks or anything like that. It just keeps going. I feel like the adaptation had room to play, and they did so, and to see like the vibrancy of that eclipse sequence with what happens, if you've read or seen it, you know, was just awesome. All right, the one I have in the 4th spot kind of sort of goes against what I was just talking about with Stephen King and his rampant fat phobia, but it's Kathy Bates again. Misery. You guys know it's Misery. Reading this story, hated it. The fact that it had to be mentioned so many times that Annie was a big girl, especially because when it comes to Stephen King, it's a point of horror. It's a point of grotesqueness if somebody is overweight, which is just like bizarro to me, given that the whole plot is like she's kidnapped this author and she hobbles him and does all this awful stuff to him. But we have to keep mentioning that she's a big girl because that's also super scary. Dare I say it's scarier than her kidnapping somebody. The best part about the movie adaptation is that I don't have to hear about Annie being a big girl all the time. And it bears repeating also because of Kathy Bates. It's an iconic performance. I love her so much. She could strap me to a bed and hobble me and I'd probably thank her. This next one is a cheat, I have to admit, but Creepshow is just one of my favorite things. I love Creepshow. I love anthologies. Creepshow is such a vibe. And I know technically the comic book kind of adaptation came after the movie. The movie came first. I'm gonna include it anyway. The stories are just so fun. The comic book feel to each segment, the visual effects, the lighting that's used to achieve that are just killer. Okay, that just leaves 2 adaptations left on my list. You guys would have had no way of knowing this, how many were on my list. And they are both adapted from the same book, a book that I read in 3 days. I'll link it up here if anybody wants to watch that. And I'm reminded of it constantly because I still get comments on that video, mostly all because I didn't like one particular scene. And if you read it, you know which scene it is. Luckily not included in either adaptation because there are some people clearly who made these movies that know how fucking weird that scene is. I found it hard to choose between the miniseries and the movie adaptations, chapter 1 and 2, which for the purpose of this video, I'm going to include as one entity. And yes, I'm going to now discuss both the miniseries and the movies and wait till the very last second to tell you which one I like better for dramatic effect. So on one hand, we have the miniseries from 1990, but I think when it comes to the book, it's so heavy, I don't really want to hold it up so much, but the miniseries stays true to the whole like bouncing around between like the past and the present. The book does so even more. There's like flashbacks within flashbacks, and it's insane, and it's at times really convoluted and confusing. And then of course we have an iconic performance from Tim Curry as Pennywise. It's a great performance. I personally don't find clowns scary. I still thought he was great. I just don't really find him scary until he's like starts to become a little less clown-like. You know, when he doesn't look like a regular clown. The movies, chapter 1 and chapter 2, I think made a really smart decision to separate, for the most part, cleanly the 2 timelines. So chapter 1 is just the kids' story, and then chapter 2 is mostly the adult story. Some really scary de-aging technology going on in that one, but it's mostly the adults, so it's fine. But especially in chapter 1, I think it works really well to establish the Losers Club and their bond over the summer and them dealing with Pennywise. It ends up making chapter 2 better because we have that foundation and we're not like learning about that as we're going along like in the miniseries as it bounces around. And by splitting this story up into 2+ hour movies, collectively it's longer than the miniseries and allows for a little bit more time to see parts of Derry's history and some of these other stories that you read about in the book that I got tired of holding, so it's back up on the shelf. And we can see how Pennywise has terrorized Derry through time and not just the Losers Club. And it bears repeating, I know everyone has talked about this ever since chapter 2 came out, but the adult casting for the Losers Club is crazy good. It miniseries is in the 2 spot. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 take the top adaptation for me. I think it did the best job of staying true to the overall themes of the source material and doing something a little bit different, just presenting it in a slightly different arrangement, and it works really well. So let me know your favorite Stephen King adaptations in the comments. There's tons that I've missed, so let me know which ones are like worth reading / watching next. And of course, I'm sure you guys are gonna let me know anyway. Let me know what placements I got wrong. What would you put in the #1 spot? Did I rate anything too low? Thank you for watching this probably really long video. If you made it all the way to the end, I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay strange. Bye.